The night air clung thick with an unnatural stillness, the kind that pressed against the skin like an ill omen. The full moon hung high, casting elongated shadows through the dense woodland that surrounded the abandoned Blackwood estate. It had stood there for decades, decaying in silence, its history swallowed by the encroaching wilderness. Few spoke of it, and those who did whispered of the warning, a warning that had been ignored for far too long. The group of friends, Ethan, Jake, Valerie, and Lila, were the type who thrived on adrenaline. Ghost stories, urban legends, dares that bordered on reckless. It was all a game to them, a way to defy fear itself. So when the challenge arose to spend one night at Blackwood Estate, they didn't hesitate. They laughed off the warnings given by the town's older residents, brushing them off as nothing more than folklore. "Come on, it's just an old house," Jake scoffed as they gathered outside the wrought iron gates. Rust flaked from the metal, and a no trespassing sign dangled precariously from one chain. "What's the worst that could happen? You know what they say about this place," Valerie said, though her voice held more amusement than concern. "They say the family that lived here just disappeared. No bodies. No explanation. Just gone." "Exactly," Lila chimed in, her grin gleaming under the moonlight. "Think of the views we'll get if we live stream this. Real haunted house vibes." Ethan, the most skeptical of the group, rolled his eyes. "You guys believe too much in stories. It's probably just an abandoned dump with some rats." With that, they pushed open the rusted gate. Its groan like a dying breath. The estate loomed before them, its facade cracked and weathered, ivy twisting around its frame like the fingers of something long dead, but still grasping for life. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and rot. Their footsteps echoed against the rotting floorboards, the only sound in the suffocating silence. Lila held up her phone, flashlight cutting through the dark, illuminating peeling wallpaper and furniture draped in white sheets. "See? Nothing to be scared of," Jake said, though his bravado faltered slightly. Then came the first sign, a whisper, so faint it could have been a trick of the wind, except the air was deathly still. Valerie turned sharply, her breath hitching. "Did you hear that?" she asked. "Hear what?" Ethan replied, unimpressed. Before she could answer, Lila let out a delighted gasp. "Guys, check this out." She had found a grand dining hall, its long wooden table still set for a meal that had never been eaten. Silverware gleamed dully under the layer of dust. An ornate chandelier hung above, its crystal swaying ever so slightly, though there was no breeze. "This is insane," Lila said, setting her phone down to record. "It's like they just left everything behind." Jake ran a hand over the dust-covered plates, smirking. Maybe they got tired of their fancy dinners, but as he spoke, the plates trembled, just slightly, just enough for him to freeze. Ethan scoffed. "All right, who's messing around?" Lila and Valerie were at the other end of the room, staring at something. The walls, painted with intricate patterns, had begun to shift. Or at least, that's what it seemed like. The wallpaper's designs twisted in the dim light, curling into grotesque shapes. Faces. The whispering returned, louder now. A hushed, insidious murmur that crept through the walls, weaving between them. Lila shuddered. "Okay, that's creepy. Probably an old house settling," Ethan reasoned, though the conviction in his voice wavered. A door at the far end of the dining hall creaked open. Not suddenly, not with force. Just slow, deliberate, an invitation that none of them had requested. Jake grinned, though the humor didn't reach his eyes. Guess we're not alone after all. They stepped through, one by one, into a corridor lined with paintings, portraits of the Blackwood family, judging by their dated clothing and solemn expressions. Their eyes, dark and watchful, seemed to follow the intruders. Lila's phone beeped. "What the hell?" she muttered. "My battery's draining fast." Valerie frowned. "Mine too. I just charged it." The temperature dropped, cold enough that their breath fogged. Then footsteps. Not theirs. They came from above, heavy, deliberate, moving with purpose. Jake swallowed hard. All right, someone's messing with us. Ethan narrowed his eyes at the staircase that led to the second floor. There's only one way to find out. None of them wanted to be the first to go up, but their pride wouldn't let them back down. One by one, they ascended. The old stairs groaned under their weight, as though protesting their presence. At the top, the hallway stretched into darkness, lined with doors. Some were ajar, others sealed shut. "Pick a door," Jake whispered. Lila reached for the nearest handle. The door opened with ease. Inside, an ornate bedroom lay untouched, as if waiting for its owner to return. A vanity stood against the far wall, its mirror cracked but reflecting something that shouldn't be there. A woman. Not Lila. Not anyone they knew. A pale figure, draped in shadow, watching them through the glass. Lila's breath hitched. "Guys!" The figure moved. Not in the mirror. In the room. A rasping breath filled the silence. The whispering turned into something else. Words, spoken in a language none of them understood. Then, a single word. "Leave." The bedroom door slammed shut, trapping them inside. Outside, the whispers rose into a deafening cacophony. The paintings in the hallway twisted, their faces now screaming in silent agony. The temperature plummeted. The windows frosted over. Something was coming, and they had laughed at the warning. Now, it was too late. The room was suffocating, thick with the scent of dust, and something far worse. Something rancid, like flesh left too long in the damp. The moment the door slammed shut, the whispering outside stopped. An eerie silence swallowed the space, pressing it on their ears like the deep void of an ocean trench. Lila pressed herself against the wall, her breathing shallow, her pulse erratic. "Tell me someone else saw that." No one responded. They didn't need to. The fear on their faces said enough. Jake pounded on the door. "Okay, that's enough. Whoever's messing with us, open the damn door." Nothing. Ethan moved to the mirror, his reflection staring back at him. Just his reflection. The woman, the thing, was gone. But that didn't make it better. Valerie reached for her phone, her hands shaking. "We need to get out of here. Call someone." She tapped the screen. Nothing. The battery had drained completely. She turned to the others. "I swear it was at 80% 5 minutes ago." Lila checked hers. "Dead." Jake shook his head, muttering, "This is insane." Then the air shifted. A groan, low and drawn out, like the inhale of something massive, rippled through the walls. The chandelier above trembled. The mirror, though cracked, vibrated as though something was pressing against the other side. Then knocking, not from the door, from inside the mirror, rhythmic, slow, deliberate. A shudder ran through Lila's body. She took a step back. "We have to go. Right now." Ethan reached for the door handle. It was ice cold beneath his fingers. Twisting, he pulled hard, expecting resistance. But this time, the door didn't fight him. It swung open too easily, as if it had never locked in the first place. The hallway was different. The paintings that had once lined the corridor, portraits of the Blackwood family, were gone. In their place, the walls stretched bare and endless, an unnatural darkness swallowing the edges of the space. And the air was wrong, heavy, suffocating, like the walls were breathing. Jake took a step forward, hesitating. "This isn't how we came in." Valerie swallowed hard. "We go back down the stairs. Get outside." They moved as a unit, fast but careful, their footsteps muffled by the thickening silence. The staircase lay ahead, just as they had left it, but something was different. The steps. There were more of them now. What had once been a single flight now spiraled downward, deeper and deeper, vanishing into a pit of blackness. Valerie gasped. "No, that's not." A sound cut her off. Not a whisper. Not footsteps. A laugh. low and breathy, curling through the air like smoke. Ethan turned sharply. "Who's there?" No answer, but there was something in the dark, not moving, just standing, watching. A figure barely visible at the far end of the hall, featureless and still, as though it had been carved from the shadows. Jake clenched his fists. "Screw this." He grabbed Lila's wrist and pulled her toward the stairs. "We're going down. Now." The others followed, descending carefully, gripping the banister for support. The air grew colder with every step. Then movement. From above. Heavy footfalls. Something was following them. Jake swore under his breath. Faster. They hurried, but the stairs twisted, shifting beneath them, stretching impossibly downward. The house was changing, rearranging itself around them. A gust of air, hot, rancid, brushed against Lila's neck. A hand. She screamed. Instinct took over. She bolted, stumbling down the last few steps, crashing onto solid ground. The others tumbled after her. They were in another hallway now, lined with doors, each identical, each slightly ajar. Ethan turned in a frantic circle. What the hell is happening? A creak. One of the doors. Opening. Just a sliver. A glimpse of something inside. A figure. No. Figures. Dozens of them, barely visible in the gloom, huddled in the corners, watching with empty, hollow eyes. Then they moved, jerking, twitching, crawling toward the doorway. Ethan grabbed the nearest handle and shoved the door open. Inside, a staircase leading up. Jake didn't hesitate. "Go." They ran, taking the stairs two at a time, lungs burning, hearts pounding. The figures did not follow, but the whispering returned, louder than before, thick with anger. At the top of the stairs, another door. Ethan shoved it open. They stumbled forward into the dining hall. The same dining hall, set exactly as they had left it, as if they had never moved at all. But something was different. The chandelier no longer swayed. The plates, once trembling, were still. And the whispering was gone, a breath of silence. Then, a woman's voice, soft, lilting. "You shouldn't be here." They turned in unison. At the head of the table, a woman sat, pale, elegant, her long dark hair cascading over her shoulders. She was dressed in something old, something out of place. And her eyes were black. Ethan's mouth went dry. "Who are you?" She tilted her head slightly, as though amused. "The last one who asked me that never left." Lila's voice was barely above a whisper. Are you real?" The woman smiled. Then the room shattered. Not literally, not physically, but suddenly, impossibly, the walls cracked and the space bent. The dining table stretched warping, the ceiling vanishing into an abyss. The floor trembled beneath them, and the air grew heavy, pressing into their chests. And the woman stood. "We warned you," she murmured. Her voice wasn't just hers. It was layered, countless voices speaking in unison, rising in pitch, swelling into a cacophony of sound. The whispering returned, louder, deafening. The doors slammed shut, and the house came alive. House breathed, not in the way of shifting foundations or creaking wood, but something far worse. The walls expanded and contracted, as if enormous lungs lurked beneath the rotting framework. The air thickened, charged with something ancient, something hungry. The woman at the head of the dining table smiled, her black eyes gleaming. "You don't belong here." The whispering surged, curling around them like unseen fingers. The walls groaned as though something inside them was trying to break free. Jake stumbled back, his voice breaking. "Screw this. We're leaving." But the woman's smile never wavered. "Are you?" she murmured. The floor lurched. The dining table stretched, elongating unnaturally, its edges twisting like melted wax. The chandelier trembled violently, casting jagged shadows that danced like monstrous figures along the warped walls. Then darkness, not the absence of light, something deeper, something alive. The shadows swallowed the room whole, and for a moment there was nothing, no sound, no breath, just the suffocating weight of oblivion. Then pain. Ethan landed hard, the impact knocking the wind from his lungs. He gasped, his hands scrambling against the cold, damp floor beneath him. Dirt, not the polished wooden floors of the dining hall. Soil, grave's oil. His breath came in ragged gasps as his eyes adjusted to the darkness. Shapes emerged around him, headstones. They were outside, or, at least, what looked like outside. A graveyard stretched before them, bathed in an eerie, unnatural glow. The Blackwood estate loomed in the distance, but it wasn't the same. It was wrong, twisted, shifting, its windows black voids. The architecture bent at odd angles, as if the house were watching. Lila groaned beside him, pushing herself up. What the hell just happened? Jake sat up, shaking his head. I don't know. 1 second we were in the dining hall, and then he trailed off, eyes locking onto something in the distance. Valerie turned, following his gaze. Her stomach dropped. Graves. Not old. Forgotten markers covered in moss. Fresh. Marked with names they knew. Ethan Carter. Jake Holloway. Valerie Brooks. Lila Monroe. The dates were all the same. Died. Tonight. A chill sliced through Lila's spine. This isn't real, she whispered, shaking her head. This is some kind of sick joke. Ethan stood abruptly, scanning the area. It's the house, he said, voice low and tight. It's not letting us go. It's playing with us. A rustling noise cut through the heavy silence. Something moved among the graves. Jake turned sharply. Who's there? No answer. Then a breath. Hot. Damp. Right behind him. Jake whirled around. No one was there. But something had been. The ground shifted beneath them. A low groan rumbled through the earth, vibrating beneath their feet. Then the whispering returned. Valerie froze. It was coming from the graves. Lila's breath hitched. We need to go. Now. Ethan nodded. Back to the house. We'll find another way out. They moved quickly, skirting around the graves, careful not to step too close. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. The soil bulged in places, as if something was stirring beneath. Lila refused to look back. They reached the house within moments, but the front doors had vanished. In their place stood a massive, gaping archway, a mouth. Blackwood Estate was no longer a house. It was alive. The walls pulsed. The windows blinked like watchful eyes. Jake swallowed hard. We're not actually going in there, right? A deep, resonant boom sounded behind them. They turned. The graves were open, empty, and the whispering had stopped. Ethan clenched his jaw. We don't have a choice. One by one, they stepped forward into the open maw of the house, and it swallowed them whole. The darkness inside Blackwood Estate was absolute, not just the absence of light, but something heavier, a living void, a thing with weight and presence, wrapping around them like a thick, suffocating shroud. Lila reached for her phone. Still dead. No glow from the screen. No sound. Just the oppressive silence, thick and cloying. The air smelled of decay, of damp wood and something older, something sour, like breath exhaled from rotting lungs. Jake swallowed hard. Tell me someone still thinks this is a joke. No one answered. They were standing in what should have been the foyer, but it was different now. Warped. The walls breathed, pulsing like the inside of something living. The staircase ahead stretched higher than it should have, vanishing into shadow. Ethan turned, searching for the door they had come through. It was gone. Valerie let out a sharp breath. Of course it is. Lila took a slow step forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "So, what now?" No one answered. Then, from the darkness above, footsteps. Not rushed, not hesitant, deliberate, measured, coming closer. Jake exhaled sharply. "Okay, yeah. No. We're not waiting to see who that is." He turned down a side hallway. The others followed, moving fast but careful, their footsteps muffled by the thick silence. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. Doors lined the walls, some open, some cracked, others sealed shut like they hadn't been touched in decades. A faint glow flickered at the end of the corridor. Candlelight, flickering through a half-open doorway. Ethan hesitated. "Do we?" Valerie didn't wait. "We don't have a choice." She pushed the door open. Inside was a massive study. Bookshelves lined the walls, packed with ancient tomes. The fireplace was lit, flames licking unnaturally high, casting wild shadows across the room. And at the desk, seated like she'd been waiting for them, the woman from the dining hall. She was calm, poised, her black eyes gleaming in the firelight. "You came back," she murmured. Lila's breath caught in her throat. "We never left." The woman tilted her head. "Didn't you?" She gestured to the bookshelves. They weren't filled with ordinary books. They were filled with ledgers, journals, each labeled with a name. Jake stepped closer, squinting at the spines. His stomach dropped. Each book held a name they knew. His name, Valerie's, Ethan's, Lila's. Valerie's hand trembled as she pulled a volume free. The pages were aged, filled with entries written in perfect, slanted script. Jake Holloway entered Blackwood Estate. 11:57 p.m. Spoke his first words inside the house. 12:01 a.m. Felt the first stirrings of unease. 12:07 a.m. Began to understand. 12:30 a.m. The last entry made her throat tighten. Jake Holloway will not leave. Jake snatched the book from her hands, flipping wildly through the pages. "This isn't real." The woman at the desk smiled. "It's memory," she murmured. Lila shook her head. "Whose memory?" The woman folded her hands on the desk. "The house remembers everything." The fireplace flared, casting shadows that weren't theirs. Figures moved along the walls. People. Dozens of them, their faces blurred, their mouths stretched wide in soundless screams. Ethan clenched his jaw. "Who are they?" The woman didn't look away. "The others." A deep, rattling breath echoed through the study. Not from the woman, from the house itself. The shadows moved, crawling, twisting, dragging themselves from the walls, peeling free from the dark corners. They had faces. They had eyes. And they were watching. Valerie took a shaky step back. "We're leaving." The woman's smile didn't falter. "No," she whispered. The door slammed shut, and the shadows lunged. The shadows rushed toward them, their movements jagged and unnatural, flickering like a broken film reel. Faces twisted in agony, mouths silent yet screaming. Lila barely had time to react before one of them lunged. It slammed into her, and the air was sucked from her lungs as if she had plunged into icy water. Hands that weren't hands clutched at her skin, cold, crawling, endless. Jake yanked her backward, pulling her free from the shadow's grasp, but more of them slithered forward, reaching, clawing, hungry. Ethan slammed a shoulder into the door. It didn't budge. Valerie was flipping desperately through the book she still clutched. "There has to be something in here, some kind of way out." Lila's breath was coming fast, her body trembling. "It doesn't want us to leave." The woman at the desk just watched. Her expression was calm, almost satisfied. Jake turned on her, rage boiling beneath his fear. Why is this happening?" The woman blinked slowly, as if considering. "Then," she said, "because you were warned." Silence. Then the house shuddered. The fire roared higher, casting grotesque shadows that didn't match their movements. The bookshelves rattled, and from somewhere deep within the walls, a low, rumbling growl reverberated. Not a sound made by the house, a sound made by something inside it. The woman stood, her black eyes gleaming. This place was never meant to be disturbed, but people always come. They laugh, they mock, they ignore the warnings. Her gaze swept over them unblinking, and then they stay. The shadows swarm closer. The door remained solid. Trapped, Valerie's hand shook as she scanned the book. Then she froze. There's a way. Ethan turned to her. What? She swallowed. It says, the house takes what it's owed. A price must be paid. Jake's stomach twisted. What the hell does that mean? Valerie's voice wavered. A life. One of us has to stay. The shadows pulsed, eager. Ethan shook his head violently. No, there has to be another way. The woman tilted her head. There isn't. The shadows closed in. Jake clenched his fists. We fight. Lila grabbed his arm, her face pale. We can't fight this. The growling within the walls deepened. The room tilted, reality stretching, warping. Then, the woman's voice, quiet but sharp. You laughed at the warning. Now, one of you will never leave. Valerie's fingers tightened around the book. Jake's eyes darted between the shadows and the woman. He could feel it, the choice pressing in on them. Someone had to stay. Someone had to be taken. Lila's voice was barely a whisper. We choose, or it chooses for us. The house shook. The wall split open. The thing inside was waking, and time was up. The walls of Blackwood Estate split apart, revealing nothing but an endless abyss beyond. The shadows shrieked, their movements feverish and desperate, hungry for flesh, for a soul to claim. The woman at the desk remained perfectly still, watching. You must choose, she murmured. The ground beneath them trembled. The house was crumbling, pulling itself inward, devouring its own existence. Valerie gripped the ancient book tighter, scanning the pages. It says someone has to stay or we all die. Jake's breath came fast, his mind reeling. That's not a choice. Ethan turned to the woman, his voice hoarse. If someone stays, the others can leave? She gave a slow, deliberate nod. That is the price. Lila's hands shook. We're not leaving anyone behind. The whispering grew louder, the voices overlapping, merging, forming something incomprehensible yet all too familiar. Then the house spoke. It wasn't words, it was feeling, a raw, suffocating force pressing against their chests, forcing knowledge into their minds. A memory, a demand. This had happened before, many times. Countless souls had entered Blackwood Estate. Some left, but only because someone else took their place. Jake's heart slammed against his ribs. It was never about ghosts. Lila's lips trembled. The house isn't haunted. Ethan exhaled shakily. The house is the haunting. The woman at the desk smiled. The shadows lurched. Then Valerie moved. Before anyone could stop her, she ripped a page from the book and pressed her palm against the ink-stained paper. A shuddering breath passed through the house. The shadows froze. Jake lunged toward her. What are you doing? Valerie's face was pale, but her voice was steady. I'm paying the price. The ink bled beneath her hand, curling like black veins into her skin. Her name burned into the book's pages, scrawled in fresh, wet ink. The shadows swarmed her. No! Lila screamed, but it was too late. Valerie gasped as the darkness wrapped around her, pulling her into the abyss that had once been the walls. She didn't struggle, didn't fight. She just smiled. I won't let it take you. Then, she was gone. The abyss snapped shut. The house exhaled, its hunger sated. A door appeared, the front door, open, waiting. Ethan, Lila, and Jake stood frozen, the weight of what had just happened crushing them. Then the woman spoke one final time. You were warned. Jake's hands curled into fists, his vision blurred with rage and grief. We'll come back for her." The woman smiled, tilting her head. "No, you won't." The house rumbled. It was time to go. Lila grabbed Jake's arm, her voice breaking. "We have to leave. Now." They turned, stepping through the door, back into the real world. The cold night air hit them like a shock. The house behind them was silent. No sign of the horrors within. No sign of Valerie. No sign of anything at all. Just a rotting, empty mansion standing against the night, as if it had always been that way. Jake turned back, his throat tight. "We're coming back." Ethan swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "No one ever comes back." And deep inside Blackwood Estate, the house remembered, and it waited for the next ones who wouldn't listen, for the next ones who would laugh at the warning. Because now it was too late.